Hello everybody and welcome back to Journal Auto YouTube channel. Not long ago I made a detailed review of the Volkswagen Passat B6, and during that video I mentioned about the engine of this car, which is quite rare, I would say. It's not a 3.2 V6 or 3.6, I would have loved that, but it's not. It's just a diesel, but a rare diesel. And I promised my viewers that I will do a separate video regarding this engine. And before going and showing you how it drives and how it feels and so on, I want to talk a little bit, to make an introduction and to talk a little bit more about its specifications and some details. Now, this is a 2.0 diesel engine. Everyone from that period knows this engine from Volkswagen, but it's not the usual version with 140 horsepower, but it's a version with only 110 horsepower and only 7 gears. So it has a gearbox with only 5 speeds. But despite that, you will see that those gears are made in that way that you barely feel the need for a 6th gear. But we will talk more about that when we will drive the car, and you will, I hope you will see it in the video with your own eyes. But until then, let's talk a little bit about this engine. As I said, on Passat B6, like this model, this engine was put for a short period, only starting from October 2008 up to July 2010, because then in 2010 the Passat B7 came into place, which was just a deeper facelift of the B6, not really a new generation. And on the B7 this engine was not put anymore. It was also put on Golf Mark 6 and on Skoda Yeti and also on Volkswagen Tiguan, but curiously, the first generation of Tiguan, but curiously on Tiguan it had a gearbox with 6 speeds, not with 5 speeds like in the case of the Passat B6, Golf Mark 6 or Skoda Yeti. Many people in that period, at least up until 2008, had a lot of technical issues and reliability issues with the 2-liter diesel engine on Volkswagen, and Audi the same, because that engine was an old one. If you remember, it was not a common rail engine, it was a diesel engine with pump-duct technology. And imagine that in 2008 Volkswagen was still using that technology when, for example, Renault, which let's say it's a brand not so highline as Volkswagen, Renault had common rail diesel engine from 2001 already, and for example Opel had already common rail engines, if I remember well, on Astra H, that was launched at the end of 2003 and went into production in 2004. Volkswagen changed the 2-liter diesel engine from pump-duct technology to common rail in 2008 only. So quite late for a brand that it has, let's say, wishes to be premium. That thing was really a thing of the past, and they adopted more modern technology quite late. As I said, this is a 2-liter engine, 110 horsepower. The exact capacity is 1968 cubic centimeters. Approximately we have 2-liter engine capacity, and the engine code is CBDC, if I recall correctly. I hope I'm not wrong. Now, in terms of torque power, this is only 250 Newton meters, and that might seem quite slow, right? Because, for example, the version with 140 horsepower has a power of 320 Newton meters power of torque, and the version of the engine with 170 horsepower has 350 Newton meters power of torque. Even my Astra J, which is a smaller car, it has a 1.6 diesel engine, 136 horsepower and 320 Newton meters power of torque. Also, my old Ford Mondeo Mark IV, it had the old 1.8 diesel engine, 1.8 with 125 horsepower, but it had 320 Newton meter power of torque. This one has only 250, so for a diesel it might seem a little. Yes, but to be honest, you will see it doesn't feel like a car with only 250 Newton meters power of torque. In fact, I'm feeling it quite the same like my Astra, which has 320, or like my old Mondeo, which also had 320. This is because also the car is quite light. It's not heavy at all. Even if it's a class in Europe, it's classified as a D segment car. This one weighs only 1360 kilograms, so 1360 kilograms. My Astra here, the Astra J, which is a C segment car, weighs 1500 kilos. But let's say that Astra, we all know that the Astra J had a problem with the weight, and the Astra K, the next generation, weighted only 1300, around 1300 kilos. This one, which is a bigger car, and the segment is also bigger, the D segment, so you are on an upper level, only 1360 kilograms. The version with 140 horsepower, for example, weighs 1379 kilos, so only 19 kilos more than this one. So this would be the main specifications. This engine, this common rail this time, not POM-DEUS, proved to be a very reliable engine. It is very good for driving outside the city on longer trips, despite having only 5 gears. You will see that the gears were constructed, as I said, in that way that you can barely feel the need for a 6th gear. Just that here in Eastern Europe, many people are using them for driving in town, and they had issues with the diesel particulate filter, of course. They had issues with the turbo and so on, because people want lower fuel consumption and they use a diesel. Sadly, they are not very well educated on this one, but they are being in the past years more and more educated. They are using the diesel engines to drive inside the city for lower fuel consumption, but in the long run they will pay more for maintaining this car, because using a diesel for short distances will cause you problems that in the future it will make you pay more on repairing it than you would have paid for extra gas on a petrol engine, you know. So sadly, people have a quite poor economic education, but this is being solved in the past year when many bloggers are bringing this into attention, especially here in Eastern Europe. So that's all with the talk. Let's go for a drive and see how it feels, this engine, and also I will show you what fuel consumption it offers on longer roads, of course, because this car was made for, but also in the city, because despite not being recommended to use a diesel engine in the city, maybe sometimes in rare occasions you will still need it in the city. And we will talk a little bit also about the fuel consumption in the city. So let's go. So I'm driving now the 2.0 110 horsepower Volkswagen engine. So I'm first here in it's not a city, it's a village, but I want to show you something very interesting. I'm now changing on the 3rd gear, and I will go to 50 kilometers per hour. On the screen you'll see this converted in miles per hour. So very interesting, at 50 kilometers per hour this car in the 3rd gear has less than 2000 RPM, as you can see here. So as I said, you don't really need the 6th gear. That would be welcome, but this engine, this gearbox was made in that way that you can easily live without the 6th gear. So in the 3rd gear, as you see, only 50 kilometers per hour, less than 2000 RPM. This means that inside the city you don't need to change the 4th gear. And I compared this with my old Ford Mondeo that I had in the past. It had an engine of 1.8 diesel with 6 gears, but if I was using the 4th gear, that would be too much for the car. I had very low RPM, and if I was using the 3rd gear, I had too much RPM. So basically you had nothing in between. I mean, there was no compromise. In this case, we do have a compromise, and inside the cities the fuel consumption will be around 7 liters per 100 kilometers per hour if the city is not very congested. But as I said, I do not recommend a diesel in the city. I talked about this because probably sometimes you have to use it in the city. In some rare cases, that's okay, but I do not recommend it for daily using in the city. Not at all. You will have big problems in the long term. I'm now outside of the city. I'm in the third gear and I will accelerate 3000 RPM, 80 kilometers per hour. Fourth gear, 90 kilometers per hour, 2200 RPM. So basically you can easily drive in the fourth gear with 90 kilometers per hour, and I'm accelerating again, and now I'm going 100 kilometers per hour in the fifth gear, and look, I have less than 2000 RPM. I have around 1900 RPM, and if I accelerate a little bit more to 110 kilometers per hour, I have around 2050 RPM, 2050 or 2100 at 110 kilometers per hour in the fifth gear. In the old diesel, my first car was also a diesel more than 15 years ago, also 5 gears, and at 110 kilometers per hour in the fifth gear, I was doing 2500 RPM. In this car, you barely do 2100, and unfortunately I don't have a highway around me. There is one that will open soon, but sadly when I'm filming this it's not opened. On the highway at 130 kilometers per hour, I suspect that this car will do less than 2500 RPM. And now look, I'm doing 60 kilometers per hour in the fourth gear and I have less than 1500 RPM. So I really need to downgrade to the third gear. It's not that much of a difference compared with a car that has 6 gears. As I said, Volkswagen built this engine combined with this gearbox in such a way that, and I'm saying it again, in most cases you don't really need a 6th gear. That would be welcome, as I said, but you can easily live with those 5 gears even on highway. And the main advantage of this engine compared to the one with 140 horsepower also on Volkswagen, or the one with 170 horsepower and 6 gears each, this engine has the advantage of a much lower fuel consumption. Just look now on the trip computer, the fuel consumption on the last 15 kilometers. So I rode inside the village, also on national road, 100 kilometers per hour. Just look, I have 4.9 fuel consumption, and you will see on the screen this converted in the UK and US MPG. And the owner told me that it got on highway, on motorway, at 130 kilometers per hour, 120, 130, also 4.8, 4.9, because the owner is doing a lot of trips to Germany, Romania to Germany and back with this car. For example, in my personal car, which has a smaller engine but more powerful with 6 gears, I do on motorway, on highway, I do around 5.7, 5.8 at 100 kilometers per hour. This car does almost 1 liter less per each 100 kilometer. So that is quite of a fuel economy, to be honest. That is quite of a fuel economy, I'm not gonna lie. If I would have to choose between a car with 6 gears and this one, having in mind that this car will do, let's say, maximum 5.2 on highway, on motorway at 130 kilometers per hour, I would love to have 6 gears, but that would be a tough decision for me. So here we are at the end of this clip. I will now let you know what is my conclusion. Is it worth to buy such an engine in 2024 when I'm filming this video? Well, to be honest, I never thought that I would recommend in 2024 a diesel engine with only 5 gears, with only 5 speeds. But here I am. here I am in 2024 recommending this engine, because this engine proved to be very reliable during the years, and because this engine has a very, very low fuel consumption. So it is very economical regarding the maintenance and is very economical regarding the fuel consumption. And the apparent disadvantage of having only 5 speeds is somewhat cancelled by the way this gearbox was constructed. As I said during the video, in such a way that you can barely feel the need for the 6th gear. So this engine, it's a very recommended for those who do not have high expectations, but just they want to drive on long roads in a normal way and economical. The engine was made for the people looking at economy. Reliable, low fuel consumption. This is why, yes, even after so many years, I am recommending this engine, even though it's an old engine, diesel engine with only 5 speeds. I hope you liked the video, and I'm waiting for you in the comment section to tell me what was your experience with this engine, if you owned it, and also to tell me what do you think about such an engine with only 5 gears. All the best, and let's hear each other in other clips too.